The Rambam in Halacha Beis establishes that Kishem Shechayev Adam Lelamed Es Bino, Kach Hu Chayev Lelamed Es Ben Bino. Shenemar Vodatem Levanecha Velivnei Banecha. What does the Rambam imply by saying Kishem? What dinim will now apply to Ben Bino that apply to Bino? Can you give me two answers? Anyone? Again, the Rambam is establishing that Kishem, that there's an analogy, an equation between the theme of a father that teaches son and the theme of the father that teaches grandson. What are the meanings from this Kishem? What dinim do you derive from the fact that Ben Bino also has a status of a chiyuv for the grandfather that teaches grandson Torah? The money. Number one, he would have to pay tuition, and number two, stealing without the stealing of the mitzvah. Well, way before that, let's say you had a choice between teaching someone else's son and teaching your grandson, Ben Bino. Who would get kedim? Your grandson. And the Kesef Mishnah says, Ben Bino. What about his great grandson? Nirali Pashut. What does the word Pashut indicate? Obvious. What does that indicate? When you say something's obvious, in dinim that are Torah laws, what are you implying by saying it's obvious? That you don't need a pasuk for it. You follow? So Nira Pashut means based on logic, the same logic that applies vis-a-vis Bino, and therefore you give kedima to your son over somebody else's son, and you have to pay tuition for your son. The same logic should apply to Ben Bino. Okay, and that's in the Rambam, and the Kesef Mishnah takes it one step further to Ben Bino. So you have the choice of teaching either Ben Bino, which is your great grandson, or teaching somebody else's son. To whom do you give preference? Ben Bino. Correct. Ben Bino, which means your great grandson. The Rambam only mentions Ben Bino. Says the Kesef Mishnah, did not got Ben Bino, ve'hu adin leBen Bino. Because the Rambam didn't bother writing it out. He figured since it's partial, you'd be able to derive that conclusion on your own without him explicitly mentioning it. That's the Kesef Mishnah. So if you take a look at the Beis Yechezkel, which we mentioned the other day, the Beis Yechezkel of Rabbi Yechezkel Sarna says that he's not so sure that it's partial. He doesn't understand why the Kesef Mishnah assumes that it's partial. The Rambam quotes a pasuk, but what does the pasuk say? Gabriel, what does the pasuk say? Vodatem levanecha ulevnei banecha. It doesn't say ulevnei bnei banecha. So if you look at the pasuk, says the Rosh Hashiva, then where do you see in this pasuk anything about Ben Bino? The pasuk speaks about Ben Bino, not Ben Bino. That's the kasha of the Beis Yechezkel, and we want to strengthen that kasha. And what I did was, on these pages that I gave you, I collected a lot of sources about Ben Bino. And I'm going to try to prove to you from all these sources that Ben Beno goes down to that third generation, the son of your son, but it doesn't go beyond that. For example, take a look at the parsha of Elimelech. Elimelech, after the defeat of the 4 kings, asks Avram for a shvur. And that shvur is that you will not attack my offspring. But he doesn't say my offspring. He says, Li ulenini ulenechti. Now, what does that mean? Li, me. And then there are 2 other generations. What does that sound like if it's only 2 generations? Nini ulenechti. Right, it's only to one's grandson, which is 2 generations, but not to one's great grandson. Now, there's a commentary on Chumash of the Ayelet Hashach. Have you ever heard of it? Maybe you heard of its author. Sometimes you don't always relate from the title of the book to the author. The author's name was Rav Aaron Steinemann. Does that ring any bell to you? In any event, he died just a few years ago, very recently, and he was considered the Gadol Hador for the ultra-religious Jews here in Israel. In any event, he writes the following, and this you have to see on the next page. Ishavel lib Elokim, hine, im tiskar li, these are the words of Avimelech, and tishkar li. He says, Ulinini, you see at the end of that top line, Hakavana libni, below ben anechet. So the word nin apparently has a biblical meaning and a modern Hebrew meaning. In modern Hebrew, the word nin means a great grandson. But in biblical Hebrew, the word nin means a son. Lenechdi is a grandson. So this shvua, which Avimelech is asking Avram to take, will apply to my son and to my grandson. And Rashi comments, Ad kan rachme ha'av ala ben. In other words, he has Rachmanos, Ad kan. What does he mean by Ad kan? Until that third generation, his son and his grandson. Only that far. Says the Ayelet Hashachar, V'chein ha'imolon le'inyanei dut. He sends you the Choshen Mishpat, Siman Lamed Gimel, the laws Beidut. And there, the law is that a grandfather is not allowed to testify on behalf of his grandson, but he's allowed to testify on behalf of his great grandson. Why is that? Why can a father not testify for his son, and now we're saying even for his grandson? Are you not following me?
Yeah, just remember, like.
What's the key word here? One word on this. Anybody?
Why you can't, I think.
Why you puzzle? You're disqualified to testify on behalf of your son, and now we're extending it to your grandson.
Bias.
Okay, bias, that's a very fancy English word. But in Lashon Kodesh, what's the word that we want to use? Rachmanut. What does Rachmanut mean? Mercy, compassion. And Rashi says, Ad kan rachmei ha'av. How far does the compassion extend of a father? certainly he has compassion on his son. Now we're going one step further, and he has compassion for his what? His grandson, but Ad Kan. Because with the additional generations, he loses that connection, that emotional bondage. So that, he doesn't feel that sense of compassion that would make him possibly Avis. Do you see now how the Rashi, in the case of the Shmuah that Avraham had to take with Avimelech, do we have a Chumash by any chance?
Yeah.
If you could open up to the Chumash, that would be helpful.
No, it's
Open up if you can.
Yeah.
Rachel Chav Aleph, also Chav Gimel. Okay, then 21, 23.
Yeah.
But maybe just backtrack a little. Who's speaking? Because we're in the middle of the conversation. Avimelech, correct?
Avimelech is speaking to Abraham.
But does the Chumash say who this Avimelech is?
Maybe before.
Yeah, see if you can find it. If we can identify Avimelech. I believe he's Melech Lishnim, if I'm not mistaken.
Maybe it says.
Okay, anyway.
The Ata Kishba Liv Elkim Hena in Tishba Liv Vilimi Leneti Kapasir Asher City Imcha.
Okay, so stop here. So what does the word mean? We saw in the Elet Hashach, my son. And what's that be? Ben Beno, my grandson. Rashi. Ad Kan, 3 generations, not more. Does it mean that a great grandfather has no compassion for his great grandson? It doesn't mean that. But when you're setting up the Shmuah, there's got to be a limit. You can't say that, for all generations. It's an intense Rachmei Av. The Rachmei Av on an intense level take you to the 3rd generation, the grandson, but not to the 4th generation, the great grandson. And that's why in Eidos, the Gemara establishes that a great grandfather is allowed to testify on behalf of his great grandson. Because Ad Kan Rachmei Av. And the source for this Rashi is a Medrash Rabbah. V'ata hishava liv Elokim, hine im tishkar lil nini l'nechdi Ad Kan Rachmei Av ben. So Rashi didn't invent this; he got it from the Medrash Rabbah. Now there's a super commentary on the Medrash Rabbah called the Yefei Torah. His name was Ashkenazi. And he writes the following. Ad Kan Rachmei Av ben, ki lo yachush, meaning Avimelech is not motivated, rak al beno uben beno. Umisham v'elech, in the next generation, which is called the great grandson, Nira Rachel Mimen. It's already a generation down the line, so that the gap and the distance between a great grandfather and his great grandson is already beyond that level, which is called Rachmei Av ben. L'chein lo chosh Avimelech l'fak l'bno u'lenechto. He had to, what's the word request? I'll use, but I need a strong word. He had to request a shvuah, an oath on behalf of Avraham to protect those that he has Rachmei Av ben, and that's Ben and Ben Beno, but not Ben Ben.
The man.
The demand? Yeah, I'm not sure if it was the demand or a request. Now I found something interesting in the Alshich. The Alshich was a great commentary, and he wrote on Chumash, he also wrote on Mishlei. And in the 17th chapter of Mishlei, it says, Ateres Kenim, B'nei Banim, B'tiferes Banim Avosom. It's quite a famous puzzle. Notice that when we're talking about this Canaan, they take pride in B'nai Banim. How many generations is B'nai Banim? 2 more generations. Says the Alshich, Al Derech Pshat Yomar, if I have to interpret this puzzle based on Pshat, Ke'iyad Mamar Zal, meaning the statement of Chazal, Al, on the pasuk, Im Tishkar Li Uli'i Ulechli, Ad Kan Rachmi Aval Ben, Ad Dar Shlishi. What is he coming to exclude?
Great grandson.
Dar Revi, great grandson. So therefore, the pasuk in Mishlei is very, very precise. Ateres Canaan, does Canaan feel that they have a crown of glory through Bneihem and Bnei Banim? But they don't have that same relationship with Ben Haben, which means the great grandson.
Is it the same for Milo? If he's on the bench? Would the Chafir transfer to a great grandson, or to
Well,
a great grandfather?
first- Yeah, first you have to know if it transfers to grandpa. We'd have to leave that question on the side from time. Now you see the next source? What's the next source that I have here on your page for you? The Torah T'mima. Anybody know who wrote the Torah T'mima?
Yeah.
Epstein was his name.
The dad of the Aruch HaShulchan, or the
So the son of the Aruch HaShulchan. So the Torah T'mima, in his commentary on Chumash Bereishis, writes the following: Matzinu barif ubarosh ubeyeser poskim v'masher kosev b'brachos nudalin omen aleph. Gentlemen, are you learning brachos? Did you get as far as nudalin?
It's tomorrow. It's
What?
Nandal is tomorrow.
Tomorrow. So you'll have a head
Oh,
start.
no, Nandal is next week. Sorry.
All right.
Yeah, we did it into that. You're right. It's next
Now,
week.
a person is obligated, like today, for example, right? You have 2 hostages that were freed. They have an obligation, according to Jewish law, to recite a bracha and thank Hashem for the great miracle.
They did with YU.
I have it on my phone. Maybe we'll play it later. Kosva poskim, the Rif and the Rush write, the Lorak Hubi Atzmo. Not only does he thank Hashem with a blessing for his own miracle, Elafil b'no uben b'no, if his son experienced the salvation, or
son of the son.
his grandson, his ben b'no, would I have to recite a bracha on a miracle for my great grandson? No. V'tama dover, the Amrina b'medrash Rabbah Parshas Vayera, al apostle Tishkar li l'ni dachli, ad kan ratzalomar ad dor shlishi rachmei aval ben. So how many nafkaminas do we have now to ad kan rachmei av al ben al ben aben? Number 1. We understand the Shvuah of Avimelech that only extends as far as what? As his grandson Dar Shlishi, not beyond. Number 2, we understand the Gemara in Sanhedrin that although a grandfather is not allowed to testify on behalf of his grandson, but he can testify on behalf of his great grandson. And now we have an additional nafkamina, and that is that a bracha has to be recited for a miracle, not only a personal miracle that one experiences, but even the miracle of his son, and even the miracle of his grandson, but not the miracle of his great grandson. Do you see, Rabbi say, how the sugya is evolving? Of course, we have the pasuk in Mishlei with the Alshich. Ateres Canaan b'nei banim, but not b'nei banim.
I have a question.
Could you just give me a minute? I'm gonna ask the 180 question, I just wanna make sure I'm one step ahead, so I know what I wanna talk about. 1 second. Yeah. Go ahead.
Isn't it could be, yes. Isn't the source of all this dialogue in the Torah between Abimelech and Abraham? Is that true?
Yeah.
So how do we know that that's like divinely ordained truth about great grandsons? What if that's just what his conditions were of this Shua? So I was wondering about this the other day. Like, why do we treat dialogue in Parsha sometimes as like a way to learn out halacha? Dialogue between humans.
I think it's like this. Some halachas depend upon emotional relationships. Like, for example, the requirement to respect the parent, that is a relationship. And we're going to derive halachas about the nature of that relationship, and therefore keep it on, from a non-Jew. Do you remember his name? Excellent, Dov Ben Asina. Here too, we can derive from non-Jews, let me just finish one sentence, about a relationship. We're not deriving halachas from Avimelech. We're only trying to gauge what's called Rachmei Aval Ben. And you could add that the Torah went out of its way to point out that Rachmei Aval Ben Adkan Ben Uben Beno. So that emotional connection in a relationship between a father and a son, and for that matter, a father and a grandson, goes just that far. Not to say that there's no emotional relationship to your great grandson, but it's not the same. And here we're going to derive 3 different halakhic conclusions. One halakhic conclusion in terms of a shvuah, another halakhic conclusion in terms of edus, and a third halakhic conclusion in terms of a chiyuv bracha. But be that as it may, are you on board with me that the sources that we found all indicate that the principle of Ad Kan Rachmei Avla Ben is a binding principle that reflects itself in Jewish law?
Yes, absolutely. I'm having trouble with why that is. If Jewish law is, this is the expression of the master of the universe as given through the Torah or derived through the Torah. I understand that we're just looking at a truth about what it means to be a great grandfather, right? I understand, we're like looking into the Torah and like seeing how the people in it interacted.
Right.
But that's not, as soon as we make that halacha and we get halacha out of that, we're saying, this is what is divine. Like, I don't
In other
understand.
words, once we derive from the Torah that Rachmei Ha'av is only till the 3rd generation, now we can derive the repercussions, the halakhic implications.
How did we derive from the Torah that Rachmei Ha'av isn't only until the 3rd generation?
Because otherwise, why didn't Avimelech mention his great grandson? Why didn't he want to protect his great grandson through the bris and the shvuah with Avram?
It could have been anything. Or how do we know that he was abiding by some divine truth?
Again, when you say divine truth, we're talking about psychology, human nature. If we can prove from the Torah that this is the way human nature operates, that by the time you get to the 4th generation, it's already weakened. It's like if you add too much water to the soup, it becomes more watery than soupy, you know what I mean?
But if it's about human nature, then if I, as a human, disagree with that, then what does that mean? I really connect to my great grandson, does that mean that I shouldn't be able to testify for him? Like, it's human nature, that's how I feel.
I think the halacha operates with objective,
I know, I
you know,
agree with that,
definitions.
but it's based on the
And- and-
subjective of the
Yeah,
other.
well, again, you could feel great feelings for your great grandson, and I think you should. I would certainly encourage and recommend that, but it's not the same. It's not the same as a grandson. That's what we're saying here. All this is to support the objection of Rabbi Yechezkel Sarna to the Kesef Mishnah. Because the Kesef Mishnah says partially that when the Rambam says that the grandfather has to teach his grandson Torah with two nafkaminas, he means even the great grandson. And that's partial. That is in the mind of the Kesef Mishnah, the author of the Shulchan Aruch, a davar partial, a simple matter. Shitali. He doesn't have any psukim. He admits that the language of the Rambam doesn't say so. Comes along 4 centuries later, Rabbi Cheskel Sarna, and he says, let's look deeper into this below the surface. The relationship between a father and a son, a father and a grandson, is not the same as the relationship between a great grandfather and a great grandson. It's not the same. And I'll prove it to you with one halacha after the other. Again, the basic Tesla doesn't quote all these halachas. But I did my research and this is what I came up with. I want to add another point here from the Ayelet HaShachar, Rav Aaron Steinemann. He quotes the mitzvah of Laman Tisaper, which means that on the night of Pesach, the Torah commands me to transmit the miracles of Yetzias Mitzrayim, the suffering, Eis Asher Salalti Mitzrayim, and the great wonders and the punishment that God brought out to Mitzrayim, Vesel Sosai Asher Samti. Whom does he have to teach? When I read the Pasuk Laman Tisaper, how many generations down does it go? And the pasuk says, "Laman tisaper bi'oznei bincha uben bincha." Teach and transmit to your son and to your grandson. Who is obliquely omitted here? A great grandson. Says the Ayelet HaShachar. Look in the Balaturim. Everybody heard of the Balaturim? His name is Rabbi Yaakov Turin, Baal Turin. He was the son of the Rosh. And he writes, the Oznei Binchu Ben Bincha Ad Kan Rachmei Aval Ben. Quoting the same principle that we saw over and over again, whether it's with the Shmuah of Avram Tavimelech, whether it's the halacha of Edus, which Rashi quotes, whether it's the halacha of Brachos, and the Alshik's interpretation of Ateres Kenim, every time over and over again, they invoke the principle of Ad Kan Rachmei Aval Ben. And now the Turin, the Baal Turin, is invoking that rule to explain how many generations down the line do you have to pass on the transmission of what we experienced in Mitzrayim. Says the Ayelet HaShachar Kavanaso, the meaning of the Baal HaTurim is Shalidoros Elu Sha'adam Merachem Aleim. For those generations, I'm going to add one adjective, where there's an intense compassion, an intense love relationship. Who Mesabres Korosa. He tells that generation what transpired. What great salvation there were. Sheyedu, they should know. Shalulei atzalasam. If not for the fact that I was saved from Mitzrayim, hey lo hoyu boyim liolam. Now, surely you could say that that applies even to great grandson. But in the context of Rachmei Ha'aval Ben, We only go as far as the grandson. And we tell the grandson, you know, if not for the miracle of Yetzias Mitzrayim, you wouldn't be here today. Avolidoros, for other generations, further down the line, Yosera Chokum Mimenu, Shalotol got Krovim Lilibo. Do you see that? They're not so close to his heart. V'eino margish es kirvasam umatzavam. He doesn't feel that closeness in terms of their situation.
His great grandson.
Great grandson. Who lo misapolem alatzalosim. Who's talking here? The Ayelet HaShachar is saying that this is Pshat Balaturim. Rabbos, I think, if I'm not mistaken, is the fourth nafkamina that we derive from this cloud of Akan Rabbi Shomayim. But I did a little more research and I found the Yefei Torah. Remember I told you this is the super commentary on the Medrash Rabbah. And he writes, F. Sholomar, on that pasuk in Parashat Vayera ben Avimelech, we could suggest the Nini v'nechti de Ka'omar. What are the next two words? Lav dafka. Please underline those two words. Lav dafka. Eloli olam l'dorosav. And what Avimelech was asking, or you say Harrison demanding from Avram, was a shvua to protect all his generations. And that's called Lav Dafka. And look what he quotes in the next line. This is an unbelievable quote. Kiloshan hazeh b'hemshech hadoros hodatem levanecha ulivnei banecha. How does the Yefei Torah interpret vodatem levanecha ulivnei banecha, which refers to what?
Torah.
Talmud Torah.
Yeah, why would the Torah clearly wants the great grandchildren to know stuff, but it doesn't say it, it must be Lav Dafka. The Torah says, teach your.
But again, it's not just that we want that generation to know the Torah, but that you, as the great grandfather, are obligated with two nafkaminas to teach Torah to your great grandson. The Torah only says Bonecha Bnei Bonecha, says the Yefei Torah, I'm going to invoke the principle of Lav Dafka.
So that's obvious that, so does the Torah.
Whose shita is he now reflecting the Yefei Torah? The Kesef Mishnah. So I was very excited when I saw this. And the other day we suggested that maybe the issue of Talmud Torah and how many generations you have to go down, 3 generations to teach Torah to your great grandson, that's not the same as Rachmei Shamayim, Rachmei Aval Abonim. It's not a question of compassion. It's not a question of relationship. It's a question of Misoras HaTorah, of the transmission of the Torah through the generations, from father to son, father to grandson, father to great grandson, etc., 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 ad olam. And I believe that the same Yefei Torah that we saw on the top of our page, who takes the Gemara, the statement very literally, Kilo Yochush Rakal Beno Uben Beno, that same pastor says that in Torah, Lava. In Talmud Torah, we will not apply the principle of Ad Kad Rachmei Adam. But the bottom line is that there's a machlokas between the Kesef Mishnah and the Beis Yechezkel. The Beis Yechezkel wants to apply the principle of Ad Kan Rachmei Aval Ben to Talmud Torah. And it's quite possible that the Kesef Mishnah will accept Ad Kan Rachmei Aval Ben when the issue is compassion, when the determining factor in halacha is how intense and profound is your feeling, and after a while it's already rocho. Ad Kan up until the 3rd generation. But says the Kesef Mishnah, when we read the pasuk in Talmud Torah about Data levanecha b'nei banecha, then it includes Lav Dafka, all generations. Okay, now we have this page called Derech Mitzvot Sefer. Do you have that? Please raise your hand if you have it. Derech Mitzvot Sefer.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I'm gonna tell you who authored the Derech Mitzvot Sefer. And hopefully you'll all be familiar with his name, Rabbi Yaakov Rosnas.
Never mind.
I never knew, okay. One of the great commentaries on the Rambam is the Mishnah Lamelech. Have you heard of it, the Mishnah Lamelech? Like if you flip through this Rambam, I'm sure you'll find many pages that have the Mishnah Lamelech on. Here, like for example, if you open up the Hilchos Avodah Zarah, Perek Zayin, and here in the Frankel edition of the Rambam, it's on page Kuf Mem Hey, right? So you'll see that the Mishnah goes on and on for pages upon pages. For about 6 pages. One of the most famous super commentaries on the Rambam. My Rebbe used to say that there were 3 Jews that wore a turban, 3 scholars that wore turbans, each one, that were on the line of Reb Chaim, his Derech Halim. And one of them was the Mishnah Lamelech. Do you know what he means when he says they wore a turban?
Yeah.
They were Sephardic Chachamim.
The first Shlokim Torah.
The Sephardic Chachamim, as a general rule, were on a different kind of wavelength. But there were exceptions. There's the Divrei Emes, the Machna Ephraim, and the Mishnah Lamelech. Those were the 3 that in the Soloveitchik dynasty, they were accepted as first class London with the Derech of Bris. The Mishnah Lamelech, his name was from Yaakov Rosnas from Turkey, Constantinople, and he wrote a less famous sefer which is called Derech Mitzvot Sefer. That's what we're looking at now. This sefer is a commentary on the Sefer Mitzvahs of the Rambam. So he has the Mishnah Lamelech as a commentary on the Mishnah Torah of the Rambam, and the Derech Mitzvot Sefer is a commentary on the Sefer Mitzvahs of the Rambam. And we are now looking at the top paragraph. And he quotes the Smad. The Smad, in his calculation of the 613, says he shomolcha pen tishkach es Hashem Elokecha. That the word pen or hishomer always indicates what? Anybody know?
Less.
Right, less in English, but what does it indicate in halachic categorizations? A lotus, correct, a lotus. And the Torah forbids us from forgetting our Sinai when Hashem gave us the mitzvahs. As Torah Shalom Yisgo Bnei Yisrael Shekadosh Baruch Hu Mashpil Tova. God gave us the greatest gift, the greatest Tov in the world. Namely what? The Torah at Har Sinai. And now the Torah is forbidding us from, boasting, we're very comfortable, thanks but no thanks, and we don't recognize, but rather we ignore the great Tova of Matan Torah of Har Sinai. What's Hey Reish Mem? A Rambam. Lo Hizkir as Torah Zu. The Rambam does not categorize this as a mitzvah to be incorporated in and enumerated in the Tariq mitzvahs. So Rav Rosnas, the Baal HaMishnah Lamelech, asks why not, and he invokes the Shroshim. Now, what are the Shroshim? Anybody know? These are the rules that the Rambam set up for pages and pages and pages before he counts to 613. Those are called the Shroshim.
Invoke them, what does that mean?
And now,
Like,
the
like-
Mishnah Mel invokes the 4th Shorish, which is called the Bach Lalit.
Invoke the spirit.
What is a mitzvah klalit? For example, the Avodah Teves Hashem Elokecha, you should serve Almighty God. What mitzvah is that? Now, it is true that the Sifri derives the mitzvah tefillah from that pasuk. But leaving out the Sifri, when the Torah says serve God, that's a mitzvah close.
Means do everything.
Do everything, it encompasses the entire Torah. Says the Mishnah Melech, when the Torah says not to forget our Sinai, that really encompasses the entire Torah. It doesn't focus and single out a particular mitzvah. And therefore, the Rambam holds it's not to be counted the entirety. If you'd asked me, I would say the Smag holds that we can pinpoint the low tishna, that the Torah forbids you from forgetting. The Torah wants you to have a constant awareness of the Torah, of Matan Torah. Maybe not on an acute level, but certainly on an innate level, below the surface, we are constantly aware of the Torah. Now we go on to the Pachad Yitzchak. Now there's a contemporary Pachad Yitzchak, but this is not him. Who wrote the Pachad Yitzchak, the contemporary one? Excellent. Rabbi Yitzchak, you know where he was the Rosh Yeshiva?
Brooklyn.
In Brooklyn? Where in Brooklyn?
Wait, is
Is that the tip of your tongue?
give me the first letter.
C. Well, it's two words. The first word starts with a C, the second word starts with a B. Chaim Berlin. Okay? Now, how did I come to this Pachad Yitzchak? My son, Binyamin, is kind enough to go on to Otzer HaChochma and print it out for me. If you take a look at the Sefer Mafteach, at the beginning of Hilchos Talmud Torah, he writes the following. He says, let's see if I can find it. Here in the second column, Hadalo Mona Shalosh Mitzvahs Aseh. Why does the Ram only count one Mitzvah Aseh of Talmud Torah? There should be three. Lilmod, Lilamed Banov, Ulilamed Talmidim. Shekol Achas Nilberes Mi Pasuk Bifnei Atzmo. We have three tzivuyim in the Torah, hence we have three mitzvahs. And underneath that it says Pachad Yitzchak, Koryat. So I guess his name was probably Rabbi Yitzchak Koryat. And that's what you have here in front of you. So take a look on the left column.
Where does Pachad Yitzchak come from? Isn't that like a,
Apostle, yeah.
yeah?
Yeah, that Yaakov Avinu says, I have pachad from my father Yitzchak.
Where you said that.
Okay, the Sue. How many people by show of hands can find the paragraph that starts the Sue? On the left column, it should be about paragraph number 4. Down from the top. You have it?
Let's take 3 people,
Okay, good.
4 people.
The Sue Kasha. The my timer, lo mona b'binyan mitzvahs called achas mitzvah b'fnei atzmo. Then gimel mitzvahs lilmod. Aleph, I guess lilmod aleph means lilmod is the first. Lilamed bonav beis, ulilamed talmidim gimel. My timer, kolon kulam b'mitzvah. Why did the Rambam integrate them all into one single mitzvah?
It's like Shiva Arba Minyan. those aren't separate mitzvot, they have to be, they're sort of
But
together.
again, they're written in the Torah in one pasuk, in one sibur.
In one single way or three
One
different?
sibur, l'kachim l'chem, creates other, comes tomorrow, etc., etc. This is what you have to take. So there are 4 different parts of one mitzvah. Here, let's see how the Pachitza develops this question.
Sure.
If you got to say from mitzvahs, mitzvah yid aleph, v'zel lashon mitzvah yid aleph, ish tzivanu lilmod Torah u'lilando, v'zel anikra Talmud Torah. V'hu oro, this is all the Rambam's language in the Sefer Mitzvah, shinad levanecha. Because of the Sifri, levanecha elu hatalmidim. Ukvar nichbal zeh atzivui pa'amim rabos. The Torah repeats this command of Talmud Torah many, many times, multiple times. Ulimanitem basisem v'chu l'manilamdu. The Rambam gives you a number of examples. Ad kan l'shon. So the Pachad Yitzchak asks the following question: Sarach lahav v'kavos. We have to understand the meaning of the Rambam. Shekosav, quote, ukvar nichbal zeh hatzivui pa'amim rabos. Right, you don't count more than one mitzvah if the Torah repeats the mitzvah more than one time. Heichi korele mitzvah achas shenichbal. How could the Rambam consider this as one mitzvah that was repeated over and over again? Halo kol echad me'ashlosha, each one of those 3, nilmad mipasuk echad b'fnei atzmo. Each one of these obligations, whether it's his own obligation to study, whether it's his obligation to teach his son, or his obligation to teach Talmidim, each one of them, respectively, are derived from a different pasuk. The chiyuv lilmod mipasuk l'manitem u'shmartem. As the Rambam says here in Hilchos Talmud Torah, and he's quoting now Halacha Gimel, Mishalo Lindo Od Chayv Lames Atzmuk Shiakish and Emma Vilmanim Osum Shmartam Asos. The Od Kosav, by Yehu Rotza Lilmo Torah, the Yeshlo Ben Lilmo Torah, who caught him with no. Fine. So that's the mitzvah of L'manitim Osam Shmartam Asos. Number 2, mitzvah L'lamed is Bono, Me'aposim Vodato L'bonecha. U'mitzvah L'lamed HaTalmidim, Afal Bisha Eino Bono, Me'aposuk V'shinantam L'bonecha. Im Kain, Min Aroi L'manosam Gimel Mitzvahs. And furthermore, he says, not only are the 3 psukim, Maga means furthermore, Domishunim b'dinim. Each one of these 3 psukim generates different dinim, unique dinim. Dilalamed Panov, Mechuiv Afil Haskil Elamed. For the father to teach his son, he has to, if need be, hire a tutor and pay his salary. But to teach Torah to his friend's son, he has to do it if he can do it. But if he can't do it, he also have to pay someone else to do it. Below Lisko Lemelane. Moshe Kosu Meha Medrash Bilabonov Chayiv Lisko Lemelane Midinto. Does everybody have the question? Who can summarize the question of the Pachad Yitzchak? Harrison?
Why did the Rambam count it as one mitzvah? To teach, to learn, and to teach Talmidim, to teach your son, to teach your Talmidim, and to learn yourself. Why do you count it as one mitzvah? If you all learn from 3 separate psukim.
And?
Have different DNA.
And the incentive. So again, what's the unique din that applies to my own field to study Torah?
Comes before your.
Yes, it comes before everything, even my own son's Torah. What's unique about my field to teach my son Torah?
for your son's son.
You have to pay tuition. And then there's another chiyuv, which is only b'chinam, I don't have to support your son's tuition. If I can teach your son Torah, I have to teach your son. 3 different chiyuvim derived from 3 different psukim. Ubedocha. What does the word ubedocha indicate?
With a stretch.
Stretch. I call it apologetics. Meaning, I think the Pagad Yitzchak is going to apologize for the Rambam, but not exactly feel comfortable with the apology that he's offering for the Rambam. The time of Mishum de Kulu Mishtameh Michad Kro. According to the Pagad Yitzchak, you can derive all 3 chiyuvim from one puzzle. I'm impressed. But I'm skeptical. Let's see how you can derive all 3 from one puzzle. Osam es b'nechem. You will teach your children. V'darshinon. V'limadatem u'limadatem. Can I read in a Chacham in Gemara? This is the Gemara in Kedusha Chavdesa in Beis. U'shem hachi. Afal gav v'nichbalu. V'nichtevu kol echad v'posuk acher. B'fnei atzmo. Einam nimnim elo l'mitzvah achas. Why? Because we can derive all 3 from one puzzle. Because if the Torah says that you have to teach your children, then for sure you have to learn yourself. And that's called in the Lashon HaShas, v'limadatem u'lamadatem. Right, that's what's called a Kriya and Ksiv. So if you read it with the Ksiv, it's u'lamadatem, which means you should study. But if you read it with the Kri, it's got a chirik under the lamed, v'limadatem, you should teach. Ulibuda talmidim, nami b'chlal. Even the mitzvah to teach talmidim is included in this puzzle. Be omer, because the pasuk says, "V'lemadatem osam es b'nechem." Who's included in b'nechem? No. B'pi Hashua. We spoke about this in Great Man.
I work by a great
Right,
grandson.
that even you told me about called Banim. Remember we had Omat Locust, exactly when, stage 1, stage 2. Nami Nichlal, Bichlal HaOmer Es B'nechem, the Ashkan Talmidim Nikran Banim. So while it's true that there are 3 psukim, but we can incorporate all 3 psukim under one heading, under one rubric, under one pasuk, and derive all 3 from one pasuk. Is b'meila, the Rambam counts it as one mitzvah. Umala said, no. There's a letter missing here. Can't make out the next word, give me a second. Vidomen. Okay, there's a dollar missing. I finally figured it out. Where's my pen?
It's more than a second.
Oh, shucks. Okay. We'll stop.
Hey, grab it. Are you done with this?
I'm gonna leave everything here. Turn off the.
What was the point of that?
Okay, somebody turn that off.
Just to clarify.
I'm walking.
8:45.
No,
Good.